Welcome to Classical Ideas. This is Greg Soden. This episode is my fourth in a mini-series focusing on the scholarship of the 2019 Sacred Rites cohort. Sacred Rites provides support, resources, and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I highly recommend checking out their fantastic work on Twitter at sacred_rites or online at sacred-rites.org. The topic of this episode is yoga, cultural appropriation, and a discussion of the challenges facing public scholars of religion who openly critique structural racism in society. In the midst of history unfolding before our very eyes in the United States, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, which led to massive protests and many documented escalations by police against protesters, I find the lessons of this conversation on cultural appropriation, whiteness, structural racism, and more to be strewn throughout with lessons. The guest on this episode is Dr. Shreena Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi is a multifaceted cultural historian of religion with expertise in religion, race, the Americas, and Hinduism. She was trained at Swarthmore, Harvard, and the University of Florida. Professor Gandhi currently teaches at Michigan State University, where she starts off the first few weeks of all of her classes introducing students to the concepts of structural white supremacy and why that is important for a better understanding of religion in the United States. Her research and public scholarship are on the history of yoga, and she is revising a book manuscript on this using the framework of white supremacy and cultural appropriation. This conversation talks about all of these topics, including her incredible backstory of why she realized the importance of public scholarship. We also talk about Christianized yoga, trauma yoga, and more. We discuss two of her articles, Yoga in Popular Culture, Controversies and Conflicts, as well as the article Trauma Yoga, Goat Yoga, and Other Yoga Trends in the Age of Social Isolation. You can follow Dr. Shreena Gandhi at twitter.com/Shreena Niketa, and a link to her Twitter profile is in the show notes. Without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Shreena Gandhi. Dr. Shreena Gandhi, welcome to Classical Ideas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It is a delight to have you. I'm wondering if you can spend a moment and introduce yourself however you see fit.
Well, I'm Shreena Gandhi. I teach in the Religious Studies Department at Michigan State University, and I cover classes on religion and race in America, as well as Native American religions.
Fantastic.
And I research on yoga.
Awesome. Well, we're going to get into all kinds of stuff today. So what was your background like? How did you get interested in being a religion scholar in the first place? Like, what are some like turning points that happened for you along your years of education that landed you kind of where you are today?
I always thought I would go into history because I was very inspired by one of my U.S. history teachers in high school when I took AP U.S. history, Dr. Doug Collar. And I got to Swarthmore College and just kind of fell in love with the religion professors there in the religion department. And as I, kind of reflect on why religion and not history, I think about my grandfather who used to teach Buddhist meditation around the world, Vipassana meditation, and would come and spend summers with me, him and my grandmother, and would undo all the Hindu teachings my mom gave me. But, my grandfather and I, we would take long walks every morning in the hot New York summers and talk about philosophy, religion, the meaning of life, things that, I still remember fondly today, and I still don't have any of the answers to. And then the other thing he would do is that he'd also always take me on different trips around New York City, whether it was the World Trade Center or the Empire State Building, the museums, and then we would continue talking about that, those things that interested him and then eventually interested me too. And so I think, I'm a very analytical person, but there's something about religious studies that allows me to indulge the part of me that he helped create. Yeah.
What a nice little moving tribute. That's fantastic. I love that the cultivation of the young mind by the fantastically curious family member. That's so cool.
Yeah. I owe a lot to him, to who I am right now. For
awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
So you and I got connected because I am friends with Dr. Liz Bucar, who has this fantastic public scholarship and religion project that she manages in collaboration with other people called Sacred Rights. And this is a public scholarship group in religion. And so you are a 2019 fellow for Sacred Rights. I am interested how and why you came to be interested in pursuing this particular opportunity with Sacred Rights.
Right. Well, I've never had any aspirations to be public in any way whatsoever. But I kind of got dramatically pulled into the public eye. I think it was 2017. Me and a colleague and friend by the name of Lily Wolf wrote a blog on for the Kalamazoo College Social Justice website. And the blog post was on yoga and cultural appropriation. And in the blog post, we made some arguments about the connection of cultural appropriation to whiteness and white supremacy. And it's an argument that I'm going to be making in my book as well. And I think 3 people read it when it first came out. And then at the end of February 2018, it got picked up by the College Fix, which is a right-wing college news in quotes site.
Sure.
And from there, it got quickly picked up by Fox News. Before I knew it, Tucker Carlson had an entire segment on me, not my white co-author, just brown me. And I realized I got a ton of hate mail, some threats of various types of violence towards my body, and police reports had to be filed. And I realized that I needed to be more responsive in my own scholarship. I had a very supportive department, supportive friends that got me through it. It was definitely scary. I think it was scary also because Richard Spencer was scheduled to come onto Michigan State's campus during spring break. And I know he likes to single out professors, and I got put on a professor watch list as well. So that was fun. But since then I've been taken down from it. I'm not quite sure why. I guess I haven't been too controversial in the last few months, but I'm glad I'm off of it. So yeah, I mean, I have never had any aspirations to be particularly public, but what I realized is sometimes you don't have choices in these matters. And rather than sitting and crying, I was like, okay, I need to figure out better ways to talk about whiteness and white supremacy in ways that are more educational rather than, enraging. And you're never going to get some people to understand, right? I've learned that too. But at least I can try to pull in some people to be a little bit more literate when it comes to racism in the United States.
Wonderful.
And so then this opportunity came up and I applied.
Nice.
And, yeah. So
were you faculty in 2017?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been faculty for a long time.
Okay.
I Yeah, for 10 years now. Oh, over
Okay.
10 years. Yeah.
So were you an associate professor whenever that happened?
No, I'm a fixed term assistant faculty member at Michigan State University. So it's a unionized position, which I love, and
Oh, cool.
I love my department, and the way that we deal with labor is really great at MSU. But it's still like a precarious position because you do like a 1-year renewal, and I think I was really lucky to have a department that was so incredibly supportive, even though they got hate mail and hate
Sure.
voicemails as well. And the dean and the whole college was extremely supportive and protective, because they knew um, that just my very identity makes me vulnerable.
Mm.
And what was really funny is I have a friend in the department, Mo, who writes on jihad, Muhammad Khalil, and our department secretary was laughing. We'd laugh about this sometimes, because he writes on jihad and I write on yoga, and never has she experienced any this level of vitriol from anyone regarding his scholarship. So she was like, I mean, I think I hit a nerve, and I think it has to do with what I wrote and about whiteness and the truth about what I wrote. And I think that um, some people who would be considered politically conservative as well as politically liberal did not like what I had to say, because it's some uh, it has to do with identity, and sometimes those conversations hurt.
Mm.
So
Interesting.
yeah.
So I have been reading some of your pieces that they've sent over to me, and I'm here today mostly to talk to you about yoga as well,
Yeah.
and your range of interests, of course. Um, so I was looking at a piece of yours the other day called "Yoga in Popular Culture: Controversies and Conflicts," and I've talked about this topic on the podcast a little bit with a colleague of yours that you know named Philip D. Slip. But based on your career and research, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how yoga today um, varies from its first appearances in the U.S. like over a century ago.
Right. I mean, I think the first reference I found to yoga in American popular culture comes from Henry David Thoreau. And I don't think he knew what he was doing when he did yoga. I think, uh, based on what I've been able to extrapolate from various writings of his and various other documents, he kind of just saw it as sitting and contemplating, on the banks of the Walden, which he imagined were the banks of the Ganges River.
Yeah.
And you know, and even when you look at the Theosophists, they also don't fully know what they're doing, but like Thoreau, I think they're imagining doing something kind of exotic and Eastern, primordial, and I think all of those figures are more enticed by the exoticism of the idea of yoga than actually real yoga. And or I don't know, I hate the word real yoga, so let me go back. Other yoga that was practiced in what is now South Asia, in India.
Okay.
um because I don't necessarily think there is a particularly real yoga, right? But they were definitely enamored by this idea of the Orient, right? And engaged in very Orientalist practices, right? And an Orientalist type of racism as well.
So there's like a sort of like exotic view of what people in South Asia do, right?
Yes, yes. And I think one of the reasons that yoga has become so popular and so successful is that exotic nature of yoga has still been sustained, and is still very much a selling point in getting people to practice it, right? It's not only good for your body, but it's good for your soul.
Mm.
Right? And I don't necessarily think that there's been a huge radical change in the practice of yoga in terms of from South Asia to here, right? There is evidence, despite what a lot of white scholars will say, there is evidence of people doing yoga in terms of physical postures and breathing in 9th, 10th, 14th, 15th, 16th, whatever century in India.
Hmm.
And the best record for this is actually not texts, but material culture.
Mm.
Whether it's painted images or carved images, you can go and see temples in India that were literally carved, um, about 1,000 years ago. And they have people, or mainly women, on the sides of these temples doing this various breathing exercises with their hands and their nose, doing various postures that they couldn't do unless they had, certain types of flexibility that you get through doing yoga poses, right? So yoga has always been about uh, posturing with the body and breathing and training your breath in a certain way, right? And when you look at people like Swami Vivekananda, he focused on the breathing part, right? And then later on, you have more people bringing in these physical postures uh, that enable you to have a certain flexible body, or lose weight or whatever it is, gain strength. Um, and so you have that definite connection, right? But then I think the ways in which it's kind of been, shall we say, creatively reimagined,
Hmm.
has a lot to do with um, our particular economic system right now, and that everyone's always kind of looking for the next big thing, the next niche. And so I think you see these changes more rapidly because society is changing more rapidly than it was, let's say, 1,000 years ago.
So before we go into the reimaginings, I'm curious
Mhm.
why you landed on yoga. Like, what is your like? What was it like about deciding to become a person who studies these trends and this history within yoga? What was it about that topic that drew you in?
Well, I think partly I have to, again, credit my grandfather because we did yoga together, and he would make me, anytime I would have trouble sleeping, he would make me breathe, do a breathing exercise.
Mm.
And, but I also think, I was driving from Florida to New York, and I stopped in a hotel because there's no way I was making that drive in one night. I
Yeah.
turned on the TV and put it on VH1, and there was a show that came on called The Fabulous Life of Religion.
Mm.
And I'd already watched like The Fabulous Life of Britney Spears and J Lo, and so I was like, "Oh, let me watch this." And then all of a sudden, I see yoga, and it's like they have a picture of a Buddha, and they're like, this is an ancient system rooted in Buddhism. And that was my first, like, not exactly, but okay. And then they started talking about yoga booty ballet, and they were interviewing this white woman who had invented in quotes, yoga booty ballet. And I just thought, there's a story here, and I need to
Yeah.
tell that.
Nice. Well, these popular culture trends and the way that yoga bends to different contexts and like
Yes.
in the different cultures that it's practiced in. So a few of these, trends that you have documented on have been like all kinds of stuff, like Christian yoga, like the prevalence of like yoga pants is like a massive fashion statement and trend for like certain demographics of people, but then also things like goat yoga, rage yoga. So there's so many things I want to ask you about.
Okay.
So first thing, how did you get interested in telling the like unknown history of like the yoga pants? Like, because that was a really fascinating area that I read about in your controversies and conflicts article.
Yeah, I guess I've always been interested in the material side of religion. And I don't know if that's because I um, come from a very material religion, right? Hinduism is super material, or, you know, I, I, I genuinely love wearing yoga pants. I'm wearing them right now.
Oh, nice.
And when they first started coming out, I was like, this is amazing. you know. But I was in Old Navy and I saw a pair of yoga pants, and there was like a little tag on it, and it said things that make you go om.
Mm.
And I just thought, that's kind of interesting. And I also, as a woman and as a feminist, always am particularly perturbed when women's bodies are policed, especially when young girls' bodies are policed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're a high school teacher, so I'm sure maybe I don't know if this has become an issue at your high school or your previous high school or not, but women's what these young girls choose to wear is always an issue that comes up annually, and my question is always, why are you looking
Yeah.
at what they're wearing? And so I just kind of went from there and ended up finding all this information about Lululemon and that particular CEO and his comments about women's bodies. And I
He
just,
had a lot of really crazy things that you documented in that article.
yeah. So it just kind of mushroomed from there. But I also, the piece that I wrote was for specifically an undergraduate population. And as I said, I've been teaching for a long time, and I noticed more and more that girls are coming in wearing leggings. I wear leggings. And I thought this is one way for them to kind of maybe enter into this history, because I think when it comes to yoga, people don't know that it started in South Asia. And when it comes to this topic, I'll never say to anyone, don't do yoga, or don't come up with a creative way to do yoga. But I think for a lot of South Asians, it's just acknowledge that it came from that area, right? That there's a colonial history there. So I think yoga pants is one way to kind of get people interested in this kind of history. And also I think it's so important for young adults who are making consumer choices to understand that a consumer choice is more than just your particular preferences, but that it involves an entire labor market, and everything from how do you make the cotton, who picks the cotton, who um, refines it, who makes it into cloth, who sews those pants together, right? Who is bringing those yoga pants over to the store for you to consume, right? If you're ordering it online, who's making the cardboard boxes that those yoga pants will go into that will then bring that to your home? There's a supply chain that we don't think about, especially as Americans, and we don't think about labor. And that's the insidiousness of capitalism. It makes us forget labor. And I think right now in particular, we're being forced to think about our supply chains
Yep.
in some really, I think, important ways. And so when I wrote about yoga pants and when I teach this particular article in my class, we always talk about the capitalist side of things, right? How do those yoga pants go from A to Z, right? From a little ball of cotton to, you wearing them.
Well, and there's so much interesting detail as well about who is it marketed for, who is excluded. And in the piece, you start with a section on yoga pants with a fun, challenging Google activity.
Yeah.
What would you encourage everybody to do online whenever they search for something like yoga pants?
Well, first I would say, if you're just gonna, look whose bodies and what parts of their bodies are being shown in the images section, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the advertisements for yoga pants. I think that tells us a lot about how yoga has been gendered, and how yoga pants and yoga serves sometimes to sexualize bodies in a particular way. But the other thing that I would encourage people to look for is just what we were talking about just now. What is the supply chain? What is the process of these yoga pants? Where, if you can get this data, where is that cloth coming from, right? Who is sewing together, running the machines that sew together these pants, right? Does the place that you're buying them from have ethical labor practices? or are they saying things about women's bodies like, women should have a thigh gap, and if they don't, they're deficient?
Yeah, well, and
Right?
the Lululemon guy was saying things like, "Oh, there are certain women who shouldn't even buy these pants."
Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen him, but I just don't kind of feel like any man really should have anything to say about what women should or should not wear.
Well, and as a
Or
guy teacher, like you were
yeah,
mentioning about policing student fashion choices at schools, I've never once asked a female student to change in any way. And a lot of teachers, I would watch a lot of teachers and administrators like send people home to
yeah,
change and things like that. And I just never was willing to go there because it's
yeah,
like, do I want this person to have this experience with me where I police the way that they choose to appear at school? Or
right,
do I want to be able to teach them how to write and research
right,
and literature,
yeah. Exactly,
because
exactly.
you break that trust when you tell somebody this is what you can and cannot do no matter what.
Yeah, yeah,
That's how I see it, at least.
yeah.
So I'm definitely interested to hear a little bit more about Christian yoga as well. Why it was necessary for Christian yoga to even exist, especially when so much yoga in the United States is done like it is, as a physical exercise where there's like a lot of secularity
Right.
involved. What goes on in Christian yoga classes, and why does this exist?
Well, I mean, so the roots of yoga are, religious, right?
Yeah.
Um, I would say if you look at ancient and medieval India, you have evidence of Hindu yoga, which I think is the most prevalent. You also have evidence of Buddhist, Jain, Sikh, Muslim yoga,
Hmm.
because India or South Asia has always been a multi-religious place. It's had moments of peace and moments of violence, just like everywhere else in the world.
Sure.
And people see something's working, and they're like, okay, I'm going to adapt it to fit what I think, right? And so that makes sense, so that's important to know about the history of yoga. And I think when people like Swami Vivekananda came here, they were very well aware of they weren't going to be able to convert anyone to Hinduism, right?
Hmm.
But what Swami Vivekananda did is he said, you can do this um, alongside your Christian practice. So he
Mm.
never asked anyone to convert to Hinduism. What he said is, you do your Christian practice, and this supplements it. Yoga supplements it. So from the beginning, yoga has been set upon a secular trajectory, at least in this country and other parts of Europe. Um, I think, nonetheless, though, because of its religious roots, you do have some people that are wary of it, and just like other religions took yoga in South Asia and made it part of their practice, you have religions doing the same here too. So you have Jewish yoga. There was a great article that came out a few years ago on Muslims doing yoga in Jackson Heights, Queens. And then you also have people doing Christian yoga, right? So in the 1960s and 50s, you had nuns, experimenting and doing yoga, and priests, and the Catholic Church during the 1980s kind of shut that down. But people experiment, and so you start having Christians saying, okay, we can do yoga, but make this a part of our tradition, and reimagine things to be a part to fit our tradition. So you have the sun salutation, SON, instead of the sun,
Mm.
SUN salutation, right? And I think the majority of Christians are okay with this and comfortable with this. But then you have people like Christine Willis, who has her Christian alternative to yoga, that feel that yoga still, the very act of doing it, the very positions you're putting your body in, could result in demonic worship, because for them, Hindus are demon worshippers, I
Yeah,
guess.
idol worshiping,
Idol
etc.
worshiping, yeah.
Yeah.
And so she comes up with praise moves, right, which is a Christian alternative to yoga. Interestingly enough, though, if you look at her praise moves, they're eerily similar to what some people might recognize as yoga moves.
Mm-hmm.
And what she's doing in terms of alphabet yoga using the Hebrew Bible and Hebrew letters is very similar to what people who started experimenting with Jewish yoga were doing back in the 1970s. So there's
Gotcha.
that too. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, and there's like all these other trends as well. Like something that I'm curious about is your work studying trauma yoga,
Mm-hmm.
goat yoga, and you have another piece out just a few weeks ago during this age of the COVID-19 pandemic called Trauma Yoga, Goat Yoga, and Other Yoga Trends in the Age of Social Isolation.
Yeah.
So you put it out right at the apex of like social distancing in the US, and as like Italy, Spain, New York, France, the UK, and all other hotspots for flaring up around the world. And in the piece, you say that we are witnessing a possible transition in American yoga where it is expanding from being mostly about physical health to also lots of mental health. And since we may be in for periodic bouts of social distancing and quarantine over the next 16 to 18 months while vaccines are worked on, this is particularly prescient because we might be doing our lives via video like you and I are right now for the foreseeable future in fits and starts. So what are you noticing about how the conversation about yoga's normally communal gathering practice is changing in this age of social isolation? How is the conversation changing and adapting?
Well, so when I first wrote this piece, I had nothing about social isolation because, we hadn't even started that yet. And as I was doing my final edits, I said to the editor, I think I need to change this to at least address this because it feels kind of irresponsible not to. And as I was doing research on that, what I noticed is there are some yoga studios that just cannot sustain right now and have just had to close up.
Yeah.
There are other yoga studios that at least are trying to do online yoga classes where you pay $10 to join the class at a particular time. And then there are some yoga teachers that are like, this is not the way we were meant to teach, and are doing more one-on-one classes. And so I think right now there's just a lot of experimentation and uncertainty, and just kind of we're kind of in a waiting game, right? To see what happens. Yet, will the yoga studio be able to come back? And I would say yes, because there is something that feels particularly good about communal practice. In whether it's yoga or church or going to a bar, right? We're a communal species. And I think looking at goat yoga in particular, the communal part of that, the communal part of being able to cuddle with goats, is very much one of the reasons it is become so popular, right? Rage yoga as well, Trauma yoga, though, is something different. But did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so let's chat about those. I kind of want to know just a little bit about some of the basic details, because somebody might be learning about these styles of yoga for the first time, and they might actually be interested in trying these things for themselves with a little bit more information about them. So I kind of want to start with trauma yoga. So the last one that you were mentioning. So this isn't necessarily new, but I feel like based on my impression of the piece that I read of yours, that it might be growing somewhat quickly. What's the purpose of this practice, and how does it vary from something like, like any other kind of like vinyasa yoga or whatever?
Right. So with something like vinyasa yoga, or a lot of the other secular yoga classes that occur, a lot of focus, especially in this country, is on posture and getting that pose correct, right? And having your body particularly aligned. And this occurs in India as well. When I've done yoga courses, I'll have a woman come up from behind me and just pull my hips up to, be in better alignment, or, she'll, do other, like, try to get my calves to cooperate, which they never do because they're super tight, and so there's a lot of touching of the body. And in trauma yoga, you don't have any of that. It's not about the alignment. It's not about proper postures. The people who have been teaching it for years are incredibly and beautifully um, sensitive to the fact that the people that attend their classes have experienced various types of trauma, whether it's PTSD, whether it's sexual assault, whether it's years of child abuse, right? All different types. And so they're very careful not to touch the body, but let the practitioner move the body how they feel most comfortable. And I've been really, really impressed with that level of sensitivity, and again, reimagining yoga in such a good, nuanced way, right? That it helps people heal from their trauma.
Yeah.
And so I think that has been really, really a privilege for me to kind of do research into this and to kind of see how it's been really helpful. And then also, like, just working with Lily Wolf, who I wrote the cultural appropriation piece, she's taught me a lot about how yoga can be used to heal from various forms of racial trauma, whether it's dealing with racism or kind of being awoken to the privileges of whiteness. So yeah, I think that has been, I'm still exploring because, you know, it mandates that, but it's been really interesting to kind of see yoga be used beyond ways of just making the physical body more flexible or thinner or whatever.
Sure. Well, and that's interesting because like I used to go to hot yoga classes. And the first time somebody came up behind me and like moved my back and like my hip position, like I flinched. I was like, "Whoa," because I didn't know that was going to happen. It was my first time, and all of a sudden somebody's moving me around. So I can totally imagine to where like if somebody had some past traumas and somebody comes up and all of a sudden moves you without saying anything, that you might flinch and you might freak out and you might want to leave and never come to that studio again.
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay. So what is goat yoga?
So goat yoga, that started coming up on my radar maybe about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. So one thing I do, just because I'm not, just kind of want to see where yoga is going, is I do a Google alert.
Yeah.
So every day I get like an email that's like, these are the top 10 Google stories, and or top 10 yoga stories on Google. And goat yoga started coming up again and again and again. So when I first pitched this idea to Brett, it was about goat yoga alone. And then the other thing that started, so basically, before I move on to the other thing, goat yoga is literally just yoga with goats. And so it can either take place on a farm. There are a couple places that say that they invented it first, there's competing narratives there. I've seen it take place in actual yoga studios or in a place like Chicago, like in a public park. And so basically you do your different yoga poses, and while you're doing that, literally baby goats are roaming around you. And then afterwards you get to snuggle, carry, pet, whatever, with the goats and take pictures with them. And there's a lot of laughter involved, because while you're doing the yoga poses, sometimes a goat will like come up from behind you and decide to get onto your back, which again goes against the tenets of trauma yoga, but it works for goat yoga, and I think people are expecting that. And and right now I don't think there are any places that could safely hold a goat yoga class, but it's definitely something that if people want to engage in there, I think there are places pretty much in every single state, from what I understand. And then there are other types of, like, I found a farm that does horse yoga and goat yoga, because I know animals have always been used in therapeutic ways. And are such empathetic beings, people who experience trauma often have a dog, right? And so it makes sense that yoga has kind of gone in this direction. And I think the most interesting thing I found out in my research is that the Wounded Warrior Project actually had a goat yoga session to help veterans with PTSD, and they loved it.
Is there golden retriever yoga yet?
I don't think it's there, but I feel like that could be your next calling.
I tell you what, because like I love puppies,
Yeah.
and I think that having puppy yoga would just be a descent into laughter the whole time, because the
Right.
dogs would just be on your face when you'd be like, in like Happy Baby or something
Mhm.
like that, and the dog would come over and just start kissing you furiously, and it would just be a good little
I feel
moment.
like you need to patent this right away.
Puppy yoga.
Puppy yoga,
Um,
go to puppyyoga.com. Make sure no one's taking that
I
from
bet
you.
I bet it exists. I bet somebody's done it.
I'm
Um,
sure. Yeah.
so as I was reading your article, I looked at the section on rage yoga, and I immediately thought of, do they listen to Rage Against the Machine, like Bulls on Parade, and do yoga? And sort of, it sounds
Yeah.
like that might actually happen.
Yes.
So tell me about rage yoga, because I'm a fan of heavy metal music now and then. And so I feel like this could be something I may need to check out.
So rage yoga is actually something that you can do right now, um, because from the beginning, the person that started rage yoga, whose name is escaping me right now, I'm sorry. She actually there's a website, and she actually does have online courses that you can enroll in, and so that would, if this is something you're interested in, that's a good time to kind of go and check this out.
Hmm.
And what, part of rage yoga involves screaming into the abyss, and I
Mm,
feel like a lot of people feel like doing that right now, so that might be a thing for you. But it can, again, it's one of those things that can take place anywhere. What I found interesting about rage yoga is a lot of times it takes place in breweries,
mm.
so people can have a drink next to them as they're screaming and cursing into the abyss,
Yes.
and then socialize afterwards. I think a lot of the things with goat yoga and rage yoga involves this kind of socialization afterwards, and making friends and having that communal experience. But it is something that you can do right now too, as well.
So it's yoga that lets out internal frustrations openly and just
Yes.
screaming, ah.
Yes. And so, I mean, I think all of these in some way deal with not only the physical body, but mental health,
Mm,
right? I mean, sometimes you just need to scream into the abyss and let things go and let things out in order for your mental health to be good,
yeah.
and sometimes you just need some physical touch with, whether it's a baby goat or a baby puppy, just to kind of get that good feeling, right? So I think thinking about how we need to focus more on mental health, uh, it doesn't surprise me that yoga is also responding to this
Yeah.
call that we seem to be having generally in society.
I think I'm on about day 50 of being in my house right now. I think that's accurate. New York, I think we went down on like March 11th.
So did I, March 11th.
Yeah. And so, and you're in Michigan, so you're in sort
Yeah,
of a hot spot as well.
yeah.
Um, and I remember seeing on Twitter, after about 20 days or so of being in my house, one of my friends posted on Twitter and said, well, good morning to my neighbor who stepped out onto his balcony in his bathrobe and screamed the F word as loud as he could, took a sip of coffee, did a big stretch, and went back inside. And maybe he came from doing rage yoga in his living room and just came
Maybe.
outside to tell the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think at these times that is fucking amazing that he did
Amazing. Appropriate.
appropriate. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about your forthcoming book? I know you have a project in the
Yeah,
works.
and it's been forever that I've been working on this. Is my dissertation that failed to get published, and then I rethought about it and revamped it, um, kind of based on my experience that we first started talking about in the blog, or in the podcast, which was that blog.
Yeah.
And I realized, I think when I first revised the book, it was, my thesis was, well, this is about, how yoga has been raced, gendered, and classed, right? And very much influenced by Kimberly Crenshaw and her theory on intersectionality. And then now that I'm revising it, and I'm writing a new chapter right now for it on the importance of studying whiteness and acknowledging whiteness and white supremacy in religion and religious studies.
Mm.
And so the book is still about race, gender, and class in some ways, but also very, very intentional about talking about whiteness. So when I write about Henry David Thoreau, talking about not just what he wrote and everything, but his experiences as a white man in early America,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think kind of making that normative, right? Getting away from the idea of American as white and using white American, Euro American, the same way we use African American,
Sure.
is so incredibly important. And so that's kind of one of the intentional projects of this book, is to make it normative to talk about whiteness the same way we talk about other ethnicities and other identity experiences. And so that we're all kind of flattened and democratized in a way, and can maybe then start having those difficult conversations through this research about white privilege, about white supremacy culture as it permeates the United States, and maybe start to dismantle some of these systems.
Nice.
And get to a better place.
Fantastic. Well, are there any places online where you would direct people to if they want to know more about your work? Like maybe I know that you just put out that piece in the Revealer.
Yes.
Maybe you have some social media you want to talk about or anything like that.
I think you can follow me on Twitter, Shreena Nikita. I think that is also my handle on Instagram, which is private though, but you can always ask to be my friend.
Sure.
Where you can see pictures of my family and the food I cook.
Nice.
And also, I think, I don't know, sometimes my link is working on the MSU site, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have any questions, you can email me at gondish@msu.edu. That is Gandhi with an SH. So it's like a little bit Gandhi, but not quite. And I love my MSU email. It's the best email ever. I wish I had thought about that sooner.
Gandhi-ish. I love it.
Yes. And so, but I guess through Twitter or through email is, the best way to get in touch with me.
Right on. Well, Dr. Shreena Gandhi, this has been a fun and invigorating and also, pretty inspiring conversation about yoga and your book project and your research. I've just loved having you on and talk about your your foray into public scholarship, because your backstory leading into the conversation was unknown to me. And that was interesting as well. So I appreciate you sharing that story about saying why it's so important for religion scholars to be public facing and to be engaged in this conversation, because we have some issues that we definitely need to address in the coming years as a country to move forward.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for everything that you do, not only as a podcaster, but as a high school teacher. So.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Classical Ideas is produced by me, Greg Soden. Music on Classical Ideas is composed and performed by Derek Strybig. You can find his music at www.wearewarmmusic.com. If you like this show, please rate it on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email me at classicalideas@outlook.com. Or find me on Patreon at patreon.com/classicalideaspodcast. Thanks so much for listening.